especially to our colleagues at IUC for all of their help and their hosting and their kindness. And thank you to Anita and to Ricardo for putting this event together, and to Anita in particular, who is emulating Andy's personality and persistence in raising quite a lot of funding for this. And I think Kathy would have been super proud of me for that. So can we just join together and thank our Lord? Okay, let's go. Can I move the slides? Yes. So one other person apart from Kathy Wilkes, who we're commemorating here, is Professor Margaret Bowden. And Maggie Bowden, for those of us who started doing AI in the 80s, was very important as the philosopher, really one of the very few philosophers who was writing about and talking about AI, so it was very important. But I had a very rocky start with Maggie Bowden, which I'll confess. As a young upstart and very arrogant, but equally quite anxious 25-year-old, I went for my first ever job interview. This was at a time in the UK when there were almost no posts in philosophy available. In fact, the only posts that were created were called new blood posts. And it had to be for something novel and exciting. You weren't allowed to replace people. Mrs. Thatcher was closing down departments everywhere. So there was a post at the University of Leeds, and University of Leeds had a joint appointment between philosophy and computer science, and it was meant to be, you know, exploring issues of AI, but you had to satisfy both departments, computer science and philosophy. And Margaret Bowden, Maggie Bowden, was the external advisor for that appointment. And when I got to the formal interview, after 2 days of being there and being grilled by everybody, she said to me, she wanted to know how technical I was. And she said, I'm wondering if you prove theorems. And I said, do I prove other people's theorems? Well, it depends. And if you give me time, you know, you tell me what it is. No, I'm wondering, do you prove theorems? And I knew this was going to be very bad. And I said, well, I don't suffer from theorem envy, if that's what you're asking. That went down very bad. And I didn't get the job. But I'm still waiting to hear that from Leeds. Every time I go to Leeds, I say, did I get the job? Because I didn't bother writing back. So things got better in my relationship with Andy, but not straight away, as I'll tell you in a minute. So I was, like Remo, I was at the University of Edinburgh, which was getting above itself in those days in the 80s and saying that it was the birthplace of artificial intelligence in Europe. So Edinburgh had a very big view of itself as the major player in artificial intelligence. And that's where artificial intelligence was housed, Hope Park Square. You guys know it, right? Tiny building. So, you know, you can imagine the size it occupies and the footprint it occupies now. So these were the very early days. I was a friend and a fellow student with that chap, Nigel Shadbolt. Wonder whatever happened to him, right? Sir Nigel Shadbolt started the Open Data Institute with Tim Berners-Lee and was until recently Master of Jesus College. But you had Donald Mickey there, Terry Winograd would come and visit. There's a lot going on. But as Remo said, we were both at, I was delighted to find that out, we were both at the School of Epistemics, because there wasn't a word cognitive science in those days. But that term epistemics has sunk like a lead balloon. Nobody knows what it means. But although Edinburgh thought it was the most important place, Sussex was equally. I think the two universities that were doing anything in the AI space more important were Edinburgh and Sussex. Of course, that's where Maggie was and many other big players in the AI sphere. Now, Andy Clark and I both went for a job interview for another of these new blood posts at the University of Sussex. Andy and I would regularly at this time turn up for the same job interviews. So we went there, and Maggie Bowden asked, you know, if you were giving a course on cognitive science, you know, what would it be based around? And I said, well, you know, it'd be based around Fodor's modularity of mind, and we would talk about whether, you know, language was an input system. So, gosh, you could have, you know, seen her face just soured immediately. Andy went in for his interview, and as I understand from talking to him later, he said, I'm interested in Dennett's cognitive wheels. And she thought, you're our guy. so of course she appointed Andy Clark, and she was right to do that, because he was absolutely right for Sussex and the brand of cognitive science in Sussex, and I ended up being at Birkbeck, working with Martin Davis and with nearby colleagues like Deirdre Wilson and linguists at UCL, and we were doing language-based cognitive science. So it's a very different style, but we get the jobs that are right for us, I think, and I think we did. Delighted. Andy and I came out of our interviews and went to the pub and got absolutely smashed, as you heard. So when we were doing this AI stuff, it was in the 80s, and even though everybody now says, well, the 80s was the AI winter, what a terrible period, it wasn't entirely without its successes, because that's when IBM's Deep Blue beat Gary Kasparov, and it was suddenly understood, gosh, computers could beat humans at chess. And I confess that, that wasn't what I was interested in. In Edinburgh, we were looking at speech processing. There was natural language understanding work. Yes, but there was so much else going on. But people were very excited about this. And I must confess, I was similarly underwhelmed when I saw this result in 2016. So this is where Google DeepMind's AlphaGo beat Lisa Dahl, the world champion at Go. And I thought, okay, in the 80s we beat humans at chess, and now we're beating humans at Go. What other games can you play? And I wasn't super impressed. Forgive me. And then, of course, 2023 came, and we had the astonishing deployment of GPT 3.5, and then ChatGPT, and it was deployed and let loose on the public, and we all started to think it's a game changer. So AI got on the map again, and it looked as though it wasn't just about solving games. And here's UKRI, the UK's national funding body, saying artificial intelligence will transform the way we live and work, from the way we diagnose and treat cancer to the security of online transactions. With AI, computers can analyze and learn from information at higher accuracy and speed than humans can, and ultimately offer capabilities which complement those of humans. So it looked like we're in a new exciting period. However, we were faced with AI risks, and we'll start with the small ones, but they're not that small. If we've got bias in the inputs, or bias in the outputs, or bias in the algorithms that take us from inputs to outputs, we might get conclusions that we don't want from these systems doing tasks that we usually do. There's the failure to align with human values, where you might have a system that produces things that are unacceptable. There was always a worry about surveillance and privacy as face recognition and the software for that developed. Bigger worry about them adopting their own goals and losing control of AI systems, and we've talked about that, and I'll come back to it. It's also the worry about dual-use technology. Some of the very sophisticated tools that we have available to us are also used for military purposes. I mean, it was quite scary when we discovered that Anthropic were helping to target sites in Iran. And you think, well, how are they doing that? Pretty much the way you'd say, I'm going to Dubrovnik. Can you recommend me the 10 best restaurants I should use in Dubrovnik? Well, they'd say, can you recommend, the 100 best sites to bomb in Iran? It'd say, sure, good question. How about these? It's like TripAdvisor. So it's dual-use technology, and we should be worried about it. But of course, as people pointed out since Aristotle, a knife is dual-use as well. So okay. And then, of course, the worry about rogue actors getting hold of the technology and doing things they shouldn't to us with it. But we began to see, and this, I think, has been perpetuated by the US side more than the Chinese side, a kind of new nuclear arms race. The idea is we're in a race with the Chinese. We've got to beat the Chinese. If we don't, they will dominate us. And so that's why you've just got to let us do what we do, give us a lot of money, let everything rip. Interesting. I think there's a big interesting difference between the Chinese perspective on that and the US perspective. But let's look at this analogy in a bit more detail. So, when we're worried about countries like Iran developing nuclear weapons, there are three things that go on. There's the enrichment of the uranium, which could be for non-military purposes if it's low enough, but when it's high enough, it looks as though it's for weapons. But then it's not enough to enrich uranium. You've got to think, how can we turn it into a weapon? How can we detonate that? And then finally, there's the issue about delivery, which is you need a missile to take it to the place you're delivering it. So there's similarly three stages of AI at that level too. There's the AI power. What are the capabilities of these systems, frontier models? But then there's implementation of that capability into particular tools, particular programs, particular applications. And then there's whether you deploy them on the public, right? So there are three stages. And I think what we're seeing at the moment is that the Chinese are very worried about implementation. They're interested in what can we do with the AI we're developing? What are the range of things we can do? And then is it safe? So should we just deliver or should we constrain it? And of course, they're at a government level constraining some of their technology because they think we shouldn't deploy it immediately. So open claw was removed and was restricted. In the US, in the Mag 7, it's just enrichment. It's all about just get these frontier models to be as powerful and develop their capabilities as fast as you can. Not necessarily a healthy thing to do. So what are the worries? Testing and safety, the alignment problem, and the governance. Are there any international agreements? It's very funny that almost every other country wants to get into a global discussion about governance, except the US. So the US are now becoming, it looks like slightly the rogue actors here in a way. Okay. Now there are some good actors in this field, and I've noticed because they're up the road and we work with them very regularly, but Google DeepMind and DeepMind, before it was bought by Google, kind of noble ambitions. So their principal mission from Dennis Hassabis is to create AGI, artificial general intelligence. And Hassabis wants to do this because he says, solve intelligence, and then you can use that technology to address all the other problems, scientific, medical, social problems. And what he's really interested in is the medical applications from AlphaFold and from some of the protein work that he's doing. He's much more interested in that than toys and systems that we might use for all sorts of nefarious purposes. Okay, so there's this unspoken AGI race, and of course there are different perspectives on it and what we should do. And of course, the US is saying this: don't regulate, regulation will stifle innovation. So it's let it rip, let us just do whatever we need, otherwise China is going to get there first to wipe us out. Interesting if you think of the nuclear weapons analogy, because it wasn't the case that whoever got a nuclear weapon won and was dominated, or everybody else got nuclear weapons in the big powers, so that there's a balance. It's more like the space race. When the US won the space race, the Soviets started spending less, and their space technology declined a lot. So you wonder if these analogies are any good. But anyway, UK and US believe don't regulate, will stifle innovation. We still get that risk of bad actors using this technology for pernicious outcomes. Some say we're already there. I couldn't possibly comment, but we might wonder. So let's go back to this innovation versus regulation. Here's a line I like from Jeannie Gan, who's in Singapore and cybersecurity expert. She says we should compete on innovation. So you're not going to stifle innovation. You need to compete on innovation, but you need to cooperate on safety. That seems to me a smart strategy. Those people who say don't regulate us because it'll stifle innovation, they're trying to convince you that's the only way to think of it. I don't think that's the only way to think. I really don't. And she also says this: it's not who moves fastest, but can guardrails be put up quickly enough? I think that's the question. If you're really interested in being responsible, that's the question you should be asking. All right. But here's what I'm really going to talk about. I'm going to talk about another AI risk, which is the difference between artificial general intelligence, and the aim for that, which would be reflecting human level performance, range and application of behaviors, but maybe doing things better than we can, but kind of in a way that we do, but at scale and with great speed and efficiency, versus artificial superintelligence, which would be an idea of something that exceeds human capabilities, beyond human abilities. So this reflects a kind of struggle that we don't often hear about in frontier AI between those people who think to reach artificial general intelligence to kind of develop our models. And we model them on what we know from neuroscience, what we know from the human mind, and we might try to get those models to work and then make them even superior to us in that way, versus people who think, let's just develop intelligence, and we don't care about whether it's human or not. Human intelligence is just one form of intelligence, right? And it's there may be many others, and we might just develop this with no constraint on it being like humans. And I think that carries enormous risks, very much of the sort that Remo was telling us about today. So I'm going to say some of the things that he said less elegantly and probably more ponderously, but he got it right. And he had a potential solution. So I was glad to get that. Here's the other thing. As philosophers, we're supposed to be concerned about how we define our terms, but I've never heard a philosopher writing in AI telling us what AI is. I mean, they just assume we know. And if I asked all of you what is it, I'd probably get very different accounts. Now, interestingly enough, I'm quite impressed with, again, our research council, our overarching research council, UKRI, with all the research councils below it. It produces these documents, these strategy documents, which I read so you don't have to. And this one's called Transforming Our World with AI, and they bother to give a definition, a kind of working definition, but it's pretty good. As philosophers, it's pretty good. They say, artificial intelligence, commonly known as AI, describes a suite of technologies and tools that aims to reproduce or surpass abilities in computational systems that would require intelligence if humans were to perform them. This could include the ability to learn and adapt, to sense, understand, interact, to reason and plan, to act autonomously, even to create. I like that. It's sort of computational tools to do things which, if we did them, would require intelligence. That means it's not limited to a time. That can go on growing as the tasks and the range of things it can do increase. Not bad. Good start, I think. And of course, we get hamstrung again as philosophers when we get hooked on this question of what is intelligence. Nobody's very good at saying what that is, right? So we say there's artificial intelligence, but what's real intelligence? Kind of tricky. So I think the issue we should be interested in is not intelligence, but real abilities. Do these things have abilities? Forget what intelligence is. Just do they have abilities, and are they the abilities of the sort that we have, that we use when we are being clever, mentalizing agents? That's the sort of thing. What are the range of abilities they have? That's what matters. So, they do many things. They do many tasks in many sectors, including across industry, manufacturing, environmental monitoring, crop production, driver assistance technologies, financial trading. We've got AlphaFold, protein folding practice in medical science, AI used for drug discovery, ChatGPT, advances in reinforcement learning, and facial recognition. Okay. Now, why this is so worrying for us is because we've been here before. People point out we've been here before. In the Industrial Revolution, we had skills and abilities that were taken over by machines. Weavers who knew how to do something were replaced by machines that could do it at great speed and at great volume, vastly surpassing what the weavers could do. We've had cars that move us faster, or motorbikes that move us faster than we can move. There are all sorts of technologies that kind of improve our range and reach. But why this really worries us, I think, is because it's so intimate, it's so close to home, because it's talking about replacing abilities that are mental abilities that are about, who we think we are and what we think is very special about us. That's why it feels, I think, slightly threatening. Abilities like reasoning, planning, decision-making, languages. These are deliberative systems that do things in a way that we do. And we thought that we were kind of alone in doing this. Now, as philosophers, again, if we're going to talk about philosophy of AI, it behoves us to know what we're talking about and not just, rely on science journalism and what we've read here and there. We've got to actually think about what we're talking about. If we're going to criticize or challenge what's going on out there, we really ought to know a little bit about what's in view. So there's a huge difference between large language models, chatbots, AI assistants, AI companions, AI agents, agentic AI. And yet everybody just talks about LLMs. We shouldn't do that if we're going to get down to business. All right, so let's talk a little bit about that. There's also this thought about, when we talk about artificial general intelligence, there's always been talk of agents and talk about generality, but it was in small scale. So for example, DeepMind, where Demis Hassabis was a young chess champion who's very interested in games, he wanted to talk about agents, but we hear agents as meaning us, human agents. But the first agentic talk was about agents who could learn and win at games. And the generality that was going to be kind of a proof of concept was, what if they could learn all games? And then we could say, well, that's a kind of generality. Now, when we look at bigger tasks and new mental and intellectual abilities, can we get the same generality? So the generality of the game playing wasn't, as it were, frippery. It was meant to be a bit of proof of concept. These were meant to be prototypes, limited applications that could be scaled up later. And of course, the first environments for the general game playing models were, and this was where Demis Hassabis and colleagues, because they had careers post being students working at designing games. So they were interested in this. So it was the whole range of Atari games, including Space Invaders, including all sorts of games. And what they tried to do was build an agent that could learn how to play these games. And at first of all, we would tell it what the rules of the games were. That's not so interesting. But they then created a computational system that just watched activity of the games being played and learned the rules and learned to take part and learned from the scores they got how to improve their performance, and then learned all the rules of these games by themselves. Equally, when AlphaGo beat Lisa Dahl at Go, they then went on to build AlphaZero, which was not given the rules of Go, but watched the rules of Go and had to learn them and then apply them. So it was doing what Andy was talking about. It was intervening, getting feedback, learning, and then changing and adapting in context, perceive, act, learn, right? Now, so they were creating a deep learning agent that would master games without being told what the rules of the games were, and they succeeded. And that deep learning was looking at states of the game and moves that were made. Then it had reinforcement learning, Q learning to get the quality of it. So state of the game, action, reward value, but it has to start from curated data. So you've got to kind of prepare the data gets limited ways. So let's go back to the difference between what DeepMind were doing, which was very much in the game space, and what OpenAI were doing was in language space. And I have to tell you, because I know that, because they were up the road, and we know, and have many, we actually have many colleagues from DeepMind who are also fellows in the Institute of Philosophy. So we, you know, all hell broke loose when ChatGPT, when GPT 3.5 was released, and Google said, why didn't we know about this? Why aren't we in this space? Why aren't we doing better? And they were told, stop worrying about protein folding and get on with building a large language model. And it wasn't what Demis wanted to do, but they did it. So when we talk about large language models, or when we talk about who we're actually interacting with, when we put in queries to ChatGPT or to Claude or to Gemini, what are we actually dealing with? It's underneath is a large language model. So what is that? It's a single task engine. It's engaging in a prompt response dialogue. It only speaks when spoken to. It's like the Victorians' idea of servants and children, only speak when spoken to. Yeah, perfect. Now, large language models, as we know, are next token predictors, and that's done on the basis of probability distributions over sequences of tokens. Well, we've got the whole range of tokens. What's the next likely one? And it samples the probability distribution. It's generative. It can create new sentences from existing data that are not in its training set. But a chatbot is a language interface with a large language model. You're not talking to a large language model. You're talking to a system built over it. And that's the foundation model for the chatbot. And then more importantly, and that's really what we're talking about AI assistants. And that's large language models which have a pre-training and post-training. You're not dealing with large language models pretty much. They're just good. And also you can think of large language models. I mean, I quite like to think of large language models this way, which is the way that Alison Gopnik thinks of them. They're just like searches. It's like Google on steroids, right? It's a talking library. You can kind of ask anything in the library and the librarian will find it and tell you things about it. But that's roughly what it is. But AI systems are different. So when we're considering our exchanges with ChatGPT or Claude, we need to distinguish between large language models, which predict token from a sequence of tokens, the basis of statistical probability, and the algorithmically guided dialogue agents, which are going between you and the language model and figuring out what you want and adapting to you and building models of you, really, to know how to access and call on the language model. So LLMs are used to power these AI systems, but what we sometimes treat as real interlocutors are the dialogue agents, the bigger system, the AI systems. Okay. Now they are produced through fine-tuning of large language models, and then a second stage post-training of reinforcement learning. So let's just say a little bit about what that is, so that we're up to speed. So you take a large language model, and then you've trained it up on a data set, and then you have supervised fine-tuning. That's to shape the outputs of any query to be in the form of responses that are the right form of responses for questions that humans go in for. At first, the responses were often very long, and then people found that too ponderous and said, can you shorten them? Can you summarize? Can you be a bit more specific? So it's trying to create fine-tuning, supervised fine-tuning is trying to create the kind of responses we like. Then it undergoes a second intervention, which is reinforcement learning through human feedback. So you take the answers it gives and you put them in front of human panels and you give it two choices. So here's what happens. You will train a system, a fine-tuning system, and ask it to produce two answers every time. And it produces two answers, and then what the humans do is say, which do they prefer as an answer, right? So it generates two answers, and the labelers are us saying which answer is better. This generates red and green preferences for answers, and we train the model by reinforcement learning to generate more green than red. So the model is trained to classify how much better an output is, maximize the green, minimize the red, okay? And interestingly, at the supervised fine-tuning level, because it's trying to come up with agreeable forms, you might get more hallucinations because it's trying to give what people want to hear, but then the reinforcement learning is saying that's no good. We've got to do better. There's then an evaluation of the answers. What's the proportion of red to green that you're getting, as seen by other humans in the loop? And that gives you a benchmark of the percentage of accuracy. The percentage of accuracy for some of the latest models is about 84%, pretty high. Okay, so that's what industry is doing. And yesterday, just so that we're on the right page, where we had, oh, they're not good at context. The context window has become enormous in the latest models. This was 2024, February 2024, when DeepMind tried to catch up with OpenAI, released their Gemini 1.5 Pro. And at first, what it had was, it had a context window. Prior to you asking it something, you could have 1 million tokens in there ahead of what your query is, right? That's about 750,000 words. It's now gone up to about 10 million tokens. You can have, pretty much the Encyclopedia Britannica in there. You could have much of Wikipedia in there. You could have much of, you could have the whole of a Tolstoy novel and an hour of a film or a video in there before, you ask. It also is learning about you. So it has an analog of short-term memory and semantic memory. The large language models got semantic memory. There's a lot of facts and things. But the short-term memory is you're telling it who you are and what you want and what you need from it, and it's developing what's relevant to you in a model of view. That's prompt engineering. So most of what's clever is the prompt engineering, the prompts that go in. And there are 800 prompts before you put your question in that's guiding what it's doing with you. So you just need to bear that in mind. That context window is growing all the time. But here was one problem. Large language models lack the capacity to plan at first. So this is where, again, Dennis Fasabis and colleagues joined in and said, look, we've got large language models, everybody thinks we're done, but we're not. So they, in Google DeepMind, started producing large reasoning models. So it turned out that when you got these models to do mathematics, they were often pretty poor, but how they got better was by saying to them, go step by step, take your time, answer it in sequence, and they talk about a chain of thought, break the problem down. So that's exactly what these large language models do, the large reasoning models do. So imagine you've got a question, what is 3 weeks and 4 days? If there's nothing like that in its training set, it might not be able to come up with an answer. So it says 3 weeks, a week is 7 days, 3 weeks is 21 days, 21 days and 4 days is 25 days. So it'll do it that way instead of just trying to produce the most probably likely, statistically likely answer to that, which it may not do well on. Okay. Now these models are getting more and more sophisticated. They're doing a kind of form of introspection on their own workings. Some of them, if they fail to get an answer, will say, hang on, wait a moment, let's step back, and they'll reset. So I mean, there's an awful lot that we're dealing with that's way beyond what we talk of when we talk of large language models. Okay, so let's go back to our AI assistants and what worries us about them. Well, the companies are very keen to suggest that they're going to be everywhere in our life. This is from again another institute fellow at Google DeepMind, Gabriel Yassam, a big paper with about 60 authors. While the market for AI assistants is nascent, assistant technologies could in the near future enter the workplace as digital colleagues. They could also enter schools as digital tutors and homes as digital entertainment. So the idea is, we're going to be replete with these things. And it's happening. So the question I have for you is, should we treat these AI assistants as tools or colleagues? What's their status? How are we thinking of them, and how should we think of them? I use them as tools. I'm not sure everyone uses them as tools. We know that people who use AI companions as therapists or as friends or as surrogate lovers or whatever are not seeing them that way. But it's a good question. So here's Yuval Noah Harari telling us AI is no longer a tool, it is an agent. So he's made his mind up. However, we've got to be careful with that. It's very easy to see agency where there is none. And it's not a new problem. When Remo and I were in the School of Epistemics and we're hanging out at AI with Henry Thompson and others, he used to persuade us at lunchtime we were supposed to log on to Eliza and play with Eliza. And if we found any bugs or fails, we were to let them know so they could recode and improve it. So Eliza, as you probably know, acts like a transactional therapist, and it says, hello, I'm Eliza. I hear you've been having problems. Tell me what's been going on lately. And you'd say, I haven't been sleeping well. I had a dream about my father. Your father? Tell me about your father. You've got problems with your father. So it was a very simple system. It worked by pattern acting pairs. If it had a pattern, it would, keywords like father or anything, it would trigger and it would come out in a script. But if you said, I hate you, all it did was, it didn't know what hate meant. It'd say, why do you X me? It would just do that kind of flip. And if it couldn't come up with either pattern matching or keyword, it had 10 things on a stack that were fillers that said, please continue, or that's very interesting, or tell me more. And because there were 10 and they were rotating on a stack, you didn't notice that they came back. But the trouble was it had no memory. It didn't from one line to another, it didn't keep any memory. Amazing how convincing it was, really convincing. So when you're in a certain frame and you're playing the game, it's easy to think that we're dealing with agency, and it's dangerous. It's very dangerous. That's the Eliza effect. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, The evolution of AI has moved very quickly from simple if-then or pattern action pairs to systems that can plan and execute whole business strategies, and we're hearing about that earlier this morning. So, you know, by the time we get AI assistants like this, we're not dealing with Eliza, but we've got the same framing issue. So when you came out of Eliza, when you stepped out of it, you thought, this is like a very simple system, very impressive the way it convinces me and performs, but you had a way of stepping back. But when we frame our interactions with LLMs, we forget we only prompt them, that we don't wait for them to say, you know, oh, I've been thinking about this, or how's your day? They don't initiate the conversation. They're not discourse initial. We forget that because we've accepted the framing. But when you step out of the frame, unlike Eliza, when we stepped out of Eliza, we knew Eliza was just this kind of toy, and it was great. There was, as well as Eliza, there was the paranoid one, which would get paranoid with anything you said. Yeah, right. And what the hell are you talking about? Why are you saying that? You're driving me crazy, and everything you put in, just right. But notice that stepping outside the frame of using LLMs or chatbots or AI systems, we have polarized philosophical views. So some people think they're just stochastic parrots. They're just syntactic engines generating the most likely response. And other people are talking about, oh, we're on the dawn of AI. So the frame is not so easy to step out of because it's contested what the overall frame is. Here's a question I think that matters. What do we think is going on when we're interacting with them as opposed to what really is going on? That gap is what we're sort of interested in. And moreover, what's the right characterization of the evidence given by outputs for our interpretations of an LLM speech or language? Is it really speech? And Mirella was talking about that. Is it really speech? Is it quite surface arrangements of tokens, or is it syntactically organized? That's an empirically kind of live issue at the moment. But here's my colleague Murray Shanahan. He's a Google DeepMind group leader, fellow at the Institute, warning us not to go down the route that Yuval Noah Harari was going down so easily. He was saying this: it's a serious mistake to unreflectively apply to AI systems the same intuitions that we deploy in our dealings with each other, especially when those systems are so profoundly different from humans in their underlying operation. To ensure that we can make informed decisions about trustworthiness and safety of the AI systems we deploy, this article advises that we keep to the fore the way those systems work and thereby avoid imputing to them capacities they lack, while making the best use of the remarkable capacities they genuinely possess. So he says how we think of them ought to be governed by what's really going on, and we have to keep bearing that in mind. But not everybody agrees. So here's Herman Kaplan and Josh Dever, who are about to produce a book called Going the Whole Hog. So they're convinced that the AI systems they're talking to have beliefs, desires, intentions, are uttering meaningful sentences. They're rational agents. Now, I think it's interesting. It's a little bit of anthropology for you. I think it's interesting. They were both students of Donald Davidson's at Berkeley.
Getting started, yeah.
Now we're getting started. Now we're cooking with gas, right? Now, what's most important for Davidson is that Davidson didn't care about the innards. There was no story about what the innards were. You weren't supposed to condition your view of who you were dealing with by what was going on inside them, physically or even at the design level. Now, some people think when Davidson talks about doing interpretation, radical interpretation of someone, taking their behavior, describing it in intentional terms as the utterance of meaningful talk, backed by beliefs, desires, intentions, people thought, oh, that's just like Dennett taking the intentional stance. No. Dennett's intentional stance said, behind the intentional stance, there is the design level where you could look at the algorithms and the computation, then there's the implementation level. Davidson just had events, dear boy, events. They could be described physically, some of them can be described mentally, And you're only allowed to describe some of them mentally when it's warranted to make those redescriptions in the light of giving an interpretation that makes best life and sense of the total conduct of that creature in context. So he doesn't care about the innards. You're not to look at the innards. So that's why he's quite a good role model for his two students, Kaplan and McClure, because they say, unlike Murray Shanahan, you don't have to stop and remember what you're dealing with by thinking of how it works and what it's doing. You're to just rationalize its outputs. So this is a key quote from Davidson, I think, which will help us here. This is what Davidson thinks is important to bear in mind when you talk about states like belief and desire. They are, quote, just those states whose contents can be discovered in well-known ways. If other people or creatures are in states not discoverable by these methods, it can be not because the methods fail us, but because these states are not correctly called states of mind. They are not beliefs, desires, wishes, or intentions. So what are the well-known ways? Well, the well-known ways, of course, are radically interpreting people to see if the redescription of their behavior will sustain intentional description as actions produced, motivated by beliefs and desires. So can we see AI assistants as rational agents? Now, unless you think I've swallowed the Kool-Aid, let me give you my official view, which is absolutely not. But I want to see how far the Kaplan Endeavour view goes. I mean, here's what I want to say, just in case you think I've sold out to the Mag 7. The most important thing to remember is these are not embodied, as Sean was talking about, these are not embodied agents. There's no continuous agent engaging in a dialogue with us. In fact, you're just recruiting bits of that system to deal with your inquiry, and it's bringing the prompts that are stored for you, but it's not even the same thing that's doing it each time. They lack sense modalities. So a philosopher who seems to forget that matter, so shall remain David Chalmers, thinks we could have just pure thinkers, pure thought things without any senses. I very much doubt we can talk about minds without any senses, but there we are. And then when people talk about multimodal models, that's misleading. It's as though the visual inputs, which are classifying and categorizing what's in the world, are fitted up to the systems that do the thinking and talking as if they were actually integrated in some way. They're not quite. Can modalities be added? Again, Chalmers says in his book Reality Plus, VR works very well in vision and sound, but it's just a mere technical limitation, and eventually we'll crack that. We'll put all the other modalities in there, and we will get virtual reality experience that is as convincing as non-virtual experience. Will we though? Will we? Can AIs get closer to us instead of us granting so much to them? Because remember, what's being used to judge any encounter with an AI is us. So in what sense, are we reading in rather than reading off? People also have the most absurd views. Oh, soon we'll be able to digitize our whole experience, and our whole experience will be online. No, it won't, because tastes and smells won't be there. Those wines we had last night, that won't be there. What are you talking about? Because you're used to having photographs and putting them on, your phone, you sort of think your whole life is there. It feels like your whole life is flashing in front of you. You look through your phone, but it's not. It's really not. It's a small sensorily limited selection of your life. It's also interesting if you think that the tech bros, and I just can't help putting this in. I mean, the tech bros, so many of them say they want to be disembodied because they imagine, they want to be disembodied and beyond death they will live forever in this disembodied form. Okay, and not only do they want to be purely disembodied, do they want to live forever? They also think there might be a higher power controlling them. Where have we heard these views before? Dear God. Okay, right. Also, this is very nicely put by Jonathan Birch. There's the persisting interlocutor illusion. Many users feel a strong sense of a persisting interlocutor, a companion assistant. It's an illusion, because the state-of-the-art LLMs or assistants are generally using are considered to be a mixture of experts and models. Different experts are responding to your different parts of your query. Each subnetwork is implemented by multiple data centers, and each prompt is handled separately. One might go to Vancouver and next to Virginia. There is no someone there. There's no single self that you're interacting with, but it's a very strong illusion that you're talking to a persisting self. So be careful. That's not how it is. All right, but let's go back to these guys who think, doesn't matter what the innards are like. It's the interactions with them as it is with humans. And for Davidsonian reasons, that's what we should be focusing on.
I don't wanna,
No,
yeah, I love it, but just keep an eye on it.
I will keep an eye on that. We're getting nearer. So whether a given intentional description is correct or not for Davidson depends not on its fit with some isolable physical or neurological fact, but it's in whether the conditions are right for interpretation of someone satisfying the principles of rationality and charity. And for reasons of brevity, I'll let Anita talk to you about what the principle of charity is.
Oh, just wait.
Right, but it's trying to find a fit with the overall history of the agent. So beliefs make sense in the light of other beliefs. We see people as performing, they should make sense in the light of the beliefs and desires we're prepared to ascribe to them, and that depends on what they do and say elsewhere and at other times. And the principle of charity should ensure that people are largely right in their beliefs about the world around them by the interpreter's lights, which if we're all rational agents means the same thing. And the correct interpretation of a person's behavior will be one that ensures the best fit with rationality and charity. Now, here's something to just bear in mind. Remember, we're not looking at innards. Davidson is a descriptionist about what beliefs are. So what is it to have a belief? It's not tell me something about your innards. It's what is it to have the belief that he? Well, that's to be apt to be ascribed that belief in the course of giving an interpretation of you that makes best sense possible of your total life and conduct in rational terms, satisfying the principles of rationality and charity. So the theory of what it is to have a belief is to be what it is to be correctly ascribed that belief. So if that's right, do LLMs or better AI systems meet these conditions? They're getting better and better at sustaining those interpretations. And that's what Alan and Dever are interested in, thinking, well, they don't have bodies, they might be pure thinkers or language users, as Chalmers thinks might be possible, but that's what they think. That might work for AI systems like that, but it's not going to work. I want to suggest this is coming to the end. It's not going to work for agentic AI. So what is agentic AI? Well, luckily we heard Raymond this morning talk about that. These are systems that can make decisions and interact flexibly and autonomously in pursuit of the system's objectives. We give them an objective, but not necessarily the way to go about it. And sometimes they have to build the tools they need to go about it. Right? They pursue complex goals with minimal human intervention. And unlike traditional AI, they don't depend on structured instructions and close oversight. So they've got to be adaptable to new conditions and evolving environments. So the factors that motivate the design of agentic AI include the necessity for tools designed to be able to operate in better yet complex real-world situations with significant room for flexibility. And so they have to make on-the-spot data processing, situational assessment of a context, and their capabilities might develop and increase to help them keep track of what they need to do to participate and meet their goals. Here's an obvious case, self-driving cars. Right? That's agentic AI. They do have bodies, and they are used all the time in San Francisco. I mean, they're everywhere, and people are getting used to them, and they're fine with them. But they're making real-world situation decisions, and they're not going for a script that says don't hit a pedestrian. They're trying to make assessments of, is that pedestrian likely to step out into the road? Would that be a dangerous situation? They're doing much fancier things than we think. Military uses, of course, autonomous drones, very worrying. But here's the thing. They have got to undertake a set of complex tasks over long periods of time without human supervision and with that level of autonomy. So safety issues include transparency and accountability. Now, I want to just, they're also multiple agents. It's not a single system quite often. That matters. Okay. Now, I'm going to go quickly through these. Humans in the loop. Tricky. So trust and accountability are fundamental to the deployment of agentic AI, but they can be eroded due to lack of transparency. So the systems that you were talking about, Remo, there is a transparency. There's observation of each of the path and the flow. Not all the agentic systems will grant us that, right? So that's the point. That's the point, right? So I asked Claude, because we're here doing AI, I said, can we talk about agentic AI and the difference between that and agents and so on? And it asked me, why do you want to know? And I said, well, I'm a philosopher and I want to do so. It says, okay, so if you're writing about the nature of these systems as a philosopher, the most important technical concept to grasp is emergence. Developers don't program a model to understand philosophy, they program what's function or is model better understand the world. Intelligence is an emerging property, la 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 la. And then it says, are you focusing on on the ethics of these systems, or are you interested in agency? And I say, well, I'm interested in agency. Can you give me some examples? So here's some really interesting examples. The AI scientist. You give it a go, find a non-toxic polymer with heat resistance, and in the Berkeley A lab, the AI runs the experiments. They write the code themselves that control the lab robots. They do the experiments. And when the robots fail, they rewrite the control code. That's very fancy. It's operating in a closed loop of hypothesis, validation, testing, and revision. Software engineers. You give it a go, build an app that tracks my carbon footprint based on my bank statements. The agent sets up a server, writes the code, finds bugs in its own work, fixes them, deploys the app, makes executive decisions on which databases to use, how to handle security, without asking you for permission at each point. High frequency trading. Agentic AI now writes and deploys subscripts, analyzes microtrends. The autonomy is just complete. We humans haven't got a way of doing it at that speed. Okay. But. A question for your research. Are you more interested in moral agency or an epistemic agency? And I say epistemic agency, I'm interested in agency. This question brings us to the Holy Grail, the Pandora's box of AI research, recursive self-improvement. It's an academic philosopher. You're touching on the transition from instrumental agency to constitutive agency. Pretty good, right? And what's interesting about recursive self-improving systems, they don't, right, we've had agentic AI, which is asked to do a task and says, I need tools to do that. And it goes and builds code to create the tools it then uses to do the task. Recursive self-improvement is a system that can rewrite its own code. So it can rewrite its own goals. It can rewrite some of it. That's very worrying. Now, why should we be worried about that? Well, that's the frontier we're interested in, self-evolving agents that can access their own code base and rewrite them. And I say, okay, this self-authoring is really interesting, and I'm worried about it as a form of agency. And it says, are you interested in Davidsonian agency or Kantian agency? Ask me without prompting. I say Davidsonian, and it says, that's fascinating. You're writing this in Donald Davidson's work. His triangulation, matter, rational agents, actions, reason, cause, and so on. Really interesting. It was already onto the things I cared about. But here's, and I'm going to end here, here's the thing that matters. These systems, if we allow them, are going to have runaway powers to be doing things that we can't even understand what they're doing. So they're not in the market to be interpretable the way the Davidsonians want AI systems to be interpretable. They're not interpretable. They're really rather opaque. The desires and goals that we would naturally attribute to people or creatures or systems that are like us are missing in these systems. Therefore, we've got a hell of a problem when we try to think, how could we make sure the alignment problem is fixed and these are bringing things in line with our values. Because they're not the sort of things that are doing mental tasks alike enough to us for us to even get the alignment question going. Very dangerous. Don't try this at home, please. Right, that's it. Thank you.
Okay,
Well, we just ask you for your opinion about the following possible situation. So you are training an AI system or whatever to play a game, but not as you give an example, but not giving in the rules, but just looking at how the game is played by the proficient players. And as I understand, it's quite possible that without any rules, this system will become very proficient, even better than we are.
Yes.
Perhaps. So my question is, what about asking the system for the rules? Is it possible? Well, I'm thinking, is it possible that system is better than us and even doesn't know the rules at the end?
Yeah.
So the answer could be, well, I have no idea what they're talking about these rules, or it could be perhaps I'll give you the rules, but these rules are completely different of our rules, but they are also determining the game in some way.
Yeah.
So maybe this is giving some picture that it is happening something completely different.
Yeah.
As we imagine, yeah.
I think it's a good question. So I think it reconfigures our thinking of the game.
Yeah.
When AlphaGo made move 37, the famous move 37, Lisa Dahl thought that's a very stupid move, and even Dennis and his colleagues watching on said that's very weird, it's gone wrong. And then that turned out to be the crucial move that wins the game. And that's why they're obsessed with move 37, because it was as if it wasn't a move that humans could have thought of. And then when they get Alpha Zero and Alpha Star in the later systems, they're now producing kind of moves that we don't kind of think of and have understood. So in some sense, they're reconfiguring the game. In a way, what's exciting about a game, if you think what a game is, you remember Wittgenstein said you can't define it, and then there was some philosopher who does sort of go at definition, it's not bad, and it sort of says this is something you could do in a much more simple way, but you're constrained to do it in a way that puts all these limitations on. That's right, there's a sort of effort. It's not just get the ball to the other end, there's sort of rules about how you do that. So in a way, we want to play the games that make sense to the way we model them. And it's as if it's not so interesting to play against these systems if they do things that we can't even appreciate the quality of them. I think so. I think that's a worry. But I think with agentic AI, like the RSI, it just doesn't have, even if it tells you, insofar as it could, tells you what it's doing, we wouldn't understand it. And that's a worry, because it's kind of getting to a place we might have set it to get to, but in a way that we don't understand how it's adapting and evolving to do that.
My point was that even in this very simple constellation of games, it's also possible.
Yeah. No, I think so. I mean, I think also chess players can play against computers to kind of get better, but they actually want to play against humans. Because they're not interested in being beaten forward by the first person.
Last official match was in 2005, and then they stopped.
Yeah, no point. Right.
sorry, we have a couple of questions, but I'm gonna take privilege here, chairman's privilege, to just ask quickly about finger on this.
Yeah.
I just want to get a little clear about what it is we can't understand. I think that was beginning to come out. We can't understand the rules, we can't even understand the language, we can't even, right, I mean, uninterpretable. Can you just give it
Right,
clear?
well, this is why our ears prick up, we have uninterpretable for Davidsonian reasons.
Yeah,
Right,
okay.
right.
It encompasses quite a
Right.
lot.
But I'm taking that quite seriously. You know, when Davidson says something's uninterpretable, it doesn't mean it's got a mind different from ours. It's just not a mind, right? He wants to say you're only in the space of reasons when you can be interpreted in this way. And if you're not minded. It's doing something else very fancy, but it's not necessarily a mental ability, is the thought.
But when we're faced with this, I'm trying to get a sense of, in what sense can we not understand it?
Well,
Right? Do we have to try a bit harder?
no,
or-
I mean, look, there's a whole line of work called explicable AI or interpretable AI, where people are trying to see what's going on inside these models, but there are limits. Mechanistic interpretation, you can actually know what's going on, the weights are changing, you can see what, but that's not helping you understand why it's doing what it's doing. And at the level at which it's doing it, even its designers don't know, for layers of a deep neural net that's doing learning, doesn't know how it does it. And that's a problem for obvious reasons, that when people are refused a mortgage, or when their medical treatment is decided in a certain way, they might say, well, why was it decided that way? And if you can't give them an answer, not very good.
I'm just gonna quickly, but there's the why, which is we can't understand the mechanism that brings it about why. Right? And there's the why we don't understand the motivation or the language, right?
It's that,
Okay,
we understand the output, a decision is produced. We don't understand why it's produced.
Yeah, but the why encompasses both the mechanism, you might say the mental
No.
and the physical.
No, but we do understand the mechanism doesn't help. Just knowing the mechanism doesn't get you there.
Maybe just like a Cyril's room, kind of, if it helps, the Chinese room.
Let's stick to the question. Andy, I think you're next.
Yeah, that's cool, especially at the end. I'm worried about how worried I ought to be about the kind of highly agentic AI. It seems absolutely right that they're projecting into a very, very alien space and projecting back at us in a way that is constrained to make sense to us. So, in a way, the ecologies that we're going to form are constrained to be something that we can participate in. Now, that seems to me to be a sort of angle on something a bit Davidsonian, broadly speaking. We're gonna get by with them, and their only intrinsic interests are to reflect things back out of their big alien space into this ecology in ways that actually that we basically want, because otherwise they won't persist right now. So I wonder if I should be quite as worried as you are. Seems to me that they are not. They don't have intrinsic interests yet.
Okay, so two ways to go. One way I go with you, but I think they're no longer like extensions of our minds. It's like a calculator, a brute machine that does something that, and it gets us to where we want to be, but it's nothing to do with our ways of thinking and doing, right?
Yeah.
And we need to be worried about that as long as they stay fixed on that goal.
Yeah.
Whether or not they would develop their own interests, as it were, by maximizing the goal of what they're trying to do, by thinking, why am I doing it this stupid way? I could reorganize and do it this much better way with a lot of collateral damage. So it's not quite the paperclip objection, but it's in that ballpark, I think, because of the writing of their own code. Because rewriting their own code does allow them to mess with the goals a little bit.
We don't know how worried to be.
Yeah, we don't know, and we also don't know how useful it's going to be to have systems that do this.
Rewriting their own, if I can drop, writing their own code has a very specific benchmarking about which is used, and it's not desire, it's a benchmark.
No, it's not designed. That's right. It's not designed.
Yeah.
Julia was going to.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you.
I don't know if you.
Go ahead. We'll have plenty of time. Don't
Okay,
worry.
no, you can do it. Okay.
Oh, I was just curious, Barry. Why are these called models in the first place? I mean, typically we think of models as representations.
Yeah.
And we typically think of that as a source to target information.
Yeah.
It's unclear to me what the target is here of these models. I've been thinking about this for a while and I can't quite get an answer to it, and I wonder whether you have any answers. Are they representing intelligence? Are they representing cognitive abilities? Are they just representing, if you think there is stochastic paradox, I guess you just think that they're representing statistical correlations. Is there a way to call them models in the first place?
I mean, let's say that's a term of art for them in computer science, and that we've got to find out, first of all, how they're using it, rather than thinking they're using it the way we're using it. That might not be the case. But insofar as, and I was talking about things that aren't models, but are AI systems built on top of models, right? And AI systems are not, dialogue agents are not models. They are things that might use a large language model. A large language model is, if anything, is modeling the data and patterns in the data, which it's like taking a whole library, a Library of Congress, and then trying to sort of say, how would I organize this such as to have patterns and have selection from it and have, chunking ordering, reducing it, produce relevant responses when you ask me about any of these things. I'm not worried about that as a sense of model, but we should call everything models. That's right, and I think we're in danger of doing that because we're a bit philosophically undereducated about things we're talking about. Yeah.
Yes, but it's an interesting answer because once you realize that they're just representations of data.
Yeah.
I think the way we go about assessing them, evaluating them has to be as apt representations of the data, nothing else.
Right.
And that is a completely different.
But it's
framework for
right.
the evaluation of data.
I'm always reminded of the following thing though. Some philosophers think we are just ideas, ideas. We're just ideas. Literary scholars say there's just text, and computer scientists say there's just data. We're all committed to whatever field we're in being the most fundamental field of which everything else used to. So take that as you wish.
Really, Anna.
Yeah, thank you, Gary, this is really interesting. So as I think you've already said and presented, so there are really a lot of things to think about when it comes to AI. So the responsibility, the activities, whether they can be assigned a certain role or something. But what I'm interested in hearing is when we talk about agentic AI, so what's your stance on cognition? So would it ever...
What's my stance on it? That's a very good question.
Yeah, I mean, would you ever consider, because some authors tend to think that we can assign some part of cognition to agentic AI. So I just want to kind of, but again, that depends on what you how you define.
I think agentic AI, so there's a kind of AI systems, and dialogue agents built on large language models. Then there are agents participating in doing things. Then there's agentic AI. These are different things, right? And agentic AI, I don't think it's constrained by cognition as we know it.
Mm-hmm. So
I think they're purposely not constrained by that. Mm-hmm. Whereas someone like Hassabis thinks he's trying to reach for AGI. And while he might want agents, he still thinks he has to build in cognition. By building in cognition means the cognitive strategies that we use and the neural underpinnings of those are likely to be replicated in some way in the systems that we build to do the things that we do when we use our cognition. That's as careful as I can be, I think, and want to be.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, just for clarification about the notion of agency or an agent. There's a point where you said, well, there's no unified agent.
In agentic AI, yeah.
In agentic AI. And yet you're saying that they can rewrite their own code.
Yeah.
So what is it that's rewriting its own code? If it's a system, it has to be something that would have the ability to sort of recognize itself.
Yeah, they monitor their own internal workings for sure. Yeah. But it's not one thing. It's multi-agents in a sense that are underlying this. So, they might tinker a bit with it, or it might tinker a bit with this, and then there might be a bit of a kind of competition or a coordination as to what gets done. It's the idea that you're dealing with the thing with its purposes and intentions, I think, is what we lay on top of it, but it's not really what's going on. I mean, I defer to who knows.
Could it be in conflict with itself?
Could be. And if that's right, then it's gonna have to, I mean, quite often if it does get into conflict with itself, these systems have their own automated reinforcement learning, so they'll step back and think, that's not going well, redo it, go over here.
In a real system, you can even have perhaps the example of the envelope, just stop.
Yeah, just stop, right, stop, don't go far.
So to the extent that it's a system, I mean, that must have boundaries in some way.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say even we might not be one agent, we might have conflicting things and do different things, so what then is how do you define a unified agent, I guess, is the question.
Well, I mean, we tend to think, don't we? I mean, we may be wrong to think, and maybe this is sort of human centrism, but we tend to think that, you know, an agent comes with a single point of view and that it has exactly what Jonathan Birch was talking about. There's a sense in which you're thinking it's the same sort of like continuity that's been, you know, developing and evolving, and it has its needs and perceptions and interests, and they are very constitutive of what it is to be that creature. I just don't think any of that really applies to these multiply developing, quickly replicating, quickly evolving systems. So yeah, call them systems in that very broad way. We do have that word, but it might be confusing to sort of lump them all together and think they're all the same sort of thing. That's what we mean when we use agent. Because they are very much multi-agents that are working and distributed massively. I mean, they're not even in the same place, as I said, you know, it's being processed in all sorts of different parts of the world at different times. It's not the same thing that's always giving you the same job every time. So quite difficult to get an idea of that in your head as oh yeah, it's very bounded. A little bit difficult.
Now, was that a finger you said?
No, it's not.
It's not a finger that had.
That actually pretty well took
Okay,
care of my thing.
Okay. Sorry.
I was going to say,
One of you
like a
has-
mixture of agents, you know, we don't quite know that, you know, a mixture of experts, with a common reporting capacity.
Yeah.
We don't quite know what we're dealing with when we deal with each other, but I take your point about spatial.
But we know the difference when, I mean, although the law has got very fuzzy on this and everybody wants to talk about a corporation as a person and so on. Dealing with an organization isn't like dealing with an agent. I mean, you know, dealing with a team isn't like dealing with an agent, so.
Thanks. Thanks very much for very interesting talk. And I'm trying to understand, and genuinely not to challenge, but to understand. When you say that we don't understand what they're doing, I'm not sure I understand, and let me give you an example. We agreed that they do a kind of regression, probabilistic analysis and regression.
When you say they, you mean the large language model?
Yes, I mean, the system that you talked that many people say that they don't understand how they get to the answer, that they have all these kind of patterns that they discover in the data and basically project them. I mean, this is the simple explanation. Obviously, it's a complicated process with a lot of stages, but that's basically what they do. Now, it was already before that, you know, like in macroeconomics or other situations, there was a big data in which there is a regression and human cannot, do it or follow exactly what's going on. So I'm trying to understand, but we do understand what is a regression. We know what is the difference between linear regression and non-linear regression, and we have some idea if this is better than that. So in what sense, these models, except that they have more data, we don't understand what they do more than we don't understand what regression with many variables does.
Well, they're doing many things and at many different levels, right? So you can talk about regression, and that's one level, that's good, but that's not going to kind of completely capture what we're interested in here. So that's right. You can talk about that, but probably talking about that is going to smooth out the differences between how markets behave and how these systems are being designed, self-designed, self-organizing, and aimed at producing particular tasks that they initiate on their own. So, you know, at one level, everything's similar to everything else, but that doesn't really help us. We need to kind of pick out the levels of description and the levels of organization that are actually giving us insight into the difference. So while I agree with you, we can talk about similarities in terms of regression. That's not the level at which we're going to get much insight.
But isn't it that when you say that they self-regulate themselves, it means that the program, it's a Turing machine in which the input, changes the program according to a program.
Well, again, Turing machine is the basic level at which we can describe everything, but it doesn't distinguish between all the systems and the differences. It doesn't distinguish between a connectionist distributed network, a deep neural network, and classic old-fashioned AI. So you can talk at that level, and in some sense, in some really quite kind of trivial sense, they are all Turing machines. But that isn't the level at which we're going to find out the interesting stuff about what makes them different, what makes them capable. Some of them capable of doing some tasks and others not capable. So I get that point, but I don't think it's doing any work. It's like an idle wheel.
Can I come in here again, because I think I misspoke earlier, when I talked about the physical level.
Yeah.
Because I understand that, I think you're talking about the reasoning, that's that, right? And if I remember correctly, hearing Demi talk about this, that famous move 37,
Yeah.
I think he used the word intuition.
Yeah.
In connection with it.
Yeah.
It's like there's this intuition, right? And we don't understand. But there's a sense in which we don't understand that in our own case, right? I mean, we're so hooked on the idea that we're logical beings, that there is this other, you know, I mean, call it, I don't know, we might call it passion, you could call it intuition, you could call it, well, yesterday I think I common sense or something. It's something like that. Does that help?
It does, but I want to resist something you said, that we don't know how intuition works. We know a lot about how intuition works. So, you know, Miranda Fricker and others talk about it as being based on experience and, you know, this going through the same patterns again and then being able to generate the results of them. We know a lot about intuition coming from things like interoception and tapping your own interoceptive accuracy. So it turns out that stock market traders who are doing these incredibly fast deals, trade, no trade, they're just making instant decisions. They're looking at a bank of screens, they're going trade, not trade, yes, no, yes, no. When you look at the ones whose profit and loss score is best, they correlate very highly with people who are good interoceptors. That is, they are able to make use of the signals they get, because every time the heart beats, it sends a signal to the brain. And when that signal speeds up, that's really a sign of either excitement or fear. And turns out they're using their own physiology to kind of give them a kind of feeling of when to act in a way or not in a way. So that, and yet you might just, you ask them, they say, just intuition. But we actually have some ways of digging into that, finding out what's underlying some of that. And similarly, I interviewed for a radio program, a hostage negotiator, who's got to be very alive to how, you know, he's dealing with difficult situations. And we put him through the standard Chandran test for, are you good at interoception? By the way, people don't know if they're good at interoception, they just don't know. And he didn't know. So what you do is you say, okay, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to say start, and then you have to tell me how many heartbeats you've had after a minute when I say stop, but not touching here or here, just tell me. And most people say, I don't know what to do. You say, just guess, just do it. And with him, we were predicting he was getting a really good interoceptor. And we said, stop. What was your heartbeat? He said, it's between 46 and 47, I don't know which. It was 47.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And it turns out those people who've got better interoception are quicker and better at recognizing the emotions of others.
Yeah.
So you might say they're very intuitive with people. they're getting signals and processing them through their own bodies faster and better than other people are. So we know a bit about intuition. I won't say again.
Well, actually, that takes us back to where we started, I think, because that fits very nicely with what we heard from Andy. I think the two of you are on the same page.
Yeah.
Um,
Friends of physiology.
I'm glad you both got jobs. Okay, so I think I'm gonna thank Barry, and I'm also gonna take the opportunity to thank all our speakers.